The morning sky looked angry above Millfield Valley. Dark clouds rolled in like smoke from a distant fire, and the air felt heavy with moisture. Sarah Martinez had lived in this small town for 26 years, but she had never seen clouds quite like these. They stretched across the horizon in thick gray layers that seemed to press down on everything below. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching the first drops of rain hit the glass. Her 2-year-old daughter, Emma, played with colorful blocks on the living room floor behind her. The little girl's laughter mixed with the sound of raindrops that were getting louder by the minute. "Mama, look!" Emma called out, holding up a tower she had built with her blocks. Sarah turned away from the window and smiled at her daughter. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, but her voice carried a hint of worry that Emma was too young to understand. The rain was coming down harder now. Sarah could hear it drumming against the roof of their small house. She had checked the weather forecast that morning, and it had mentioned rain, but nothing like this. The meteorologist had talked about scattered showers, maybe some thunderstorms in the afternoon. This looked much more serious. Sarah picked up her phone and scrolled through the weather apps. The radar showed a massive storm system moving through their area. Red and orange colors covered the screen, indicating heavy rainfall. Her heart started beating a little faster. She lived on Elm Street, which was located in one of the lower parts of Millfield Valley. The area had flooded before, but that was more than 10 years ago, before Emma was born. The city had built better drainage systems since then, or at least that's what the mayor had promised during his last campaign. The sound of rain grew louder. Sarah looked out the window again and saw water rushing down the street like a small river. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was standing on her porch, looking concerned. The elderly woman waved at Sarah through the rain. Sarah opened her front door and stepped onto her covered porch. The smell of wet earth and rain filled her nose. "Mrs. Chen," she called out, "are you okay?" "I'm fine, dear," Mrs. Chen called back. "But look at this water. I've never seen it come down the street like this." Sarah looked down Elm Street and felt her stomach tighten. Water was flowing like a stream from the hills above their neighborhood. It was carrying leaves, small branches, and trash along with it. The storm drains along the street were already overflowing. "Maybe we should think about going somewhere higher," Sarah shouted over the noise of the rain and rushing water. Mrs. Chen nodded. "My son is coming to pick me up. You should think about leaving too." Sarah went back inside and closed the door. Emma was still playing happily, unaware of what was happening outside. Sarah tried to stay calm, but she could feel anxiety building in her chest. She went to the window again and watched the water level rising in the street. She picked up her phone and called her sister Lisa, who lived across town on higher ground. The phone rang several times before Lisa answered. "Hey, Sarah, what's up?" "Lisa, I think we might have a problem here. The rain is really heavy, and there's water flowing down our street like crazy." "How bad is it?" Lisa asked, and Sarah could hear concern creeping into her voice. "Bad enough that Mrs. Chen's son is coming to get her. I'm thinking Emma and I should probably leave too." "Come here," Lisa said immediately. "Pack some things and come stay with us until this passes." Sarah felt relief wash over her. "Okay, I'll pack a bag and we'll head over." "Drive carefully, Sarah. The roads might be dangerous." "I will. See you soon." Sarah hung up the phone and looked at Emma, who was now making car sounds as she pushed a toy truck around the floor. She didn't want to scare her daughter, but they needed to leave quickly. "Emma, sweetie," Sarah said, kneeling down beside her daughter, "we're going to go visit Aunt Lisa for a while. Can you help Mommy pack some of your toys?" Emma clapped her hands excitedly. "Aunt Lisa! Aunt Lisa!" Sarah smiled despite her worry. "That's right. We're going to have a sleepover at Aunt Lisa's house." She went to Emma's room and quickly packed a small bag with clothes, diapers, and some of Emma's favorite toys. Then she packed a bag for herself with clothes and important documents like their passports and birth certificates. As she packed, The rain continued to pound against the house. She could hear it getting louder and louder. When she looked out Emma's bedroom window, she saw that the water in the street was now several inches deep and flowing fast. Sarah carried the bags to the living room and helped Emma put on her rain jacket and boots. "We're going to run to the car really fast, okay, baby?" "Okay." "Mama!" Sarah picked up Emma and the bags and opened the front door. The sight that greeted her made her gasp. The water in the street was now almost a foot deep and rushing like a river toward the lower part of the valley. Her car was parked in the driveway, but she could see water starting to creep up toward it. She ran through the rain with Emma in her arms, both of them getting soaked in the few seconds it took to reach the car. Sarah quickly strapped Emma into her car seat and threw the bags in the back. As she started the car, she noticed that water was now touching the bottom of her front tires. Her heart pounded as she backed out of the driveway and onto Elm Street. The water was deeper than she had expected, and she could feel the car struggling a little as it moved through it. "Mama, water!" Emma said from her car seat, pointing out the window. "I see it, baby. We're going to drive through it and go to Aunt Lisa's." Sarah drove slowly up Elm Street toward the main road that would take them out of the valley. But as she reached the corner where Elm Street met Valley Road, she saw something that made her heart sink. Valley Road was completely flooded. Water covered the entire street, and she could see a car that had stalled in the middle of the floodwater. She stopped her car and tried to think. She couldn't drive through that much water, especially with Emma in the car. It was too dangerous. She would have to turn around and find another way out of the neighborhood. Sarah carefully turned the car around on Elm Street, but as she did, she noticed something that made her panic. The water level had risen significantly just in the few minutes she had been trying to leave. Water was now halfway up the wheels of parked cars along the street. She drove back toward her house, but as she got closer, she realized with growing horror that the water was too deep for her to safely park in her driveway. The entire lower part of her street was now flooded with fast-moving water. "Mama, I'm scared," Emma said from the back seat. She had noticed the concern in her mother's voice and the way Sarah was gripping the steering wheel. "It's okay, baby. Mommy is going to figure this out." Sarah parked the car on a slightly higher part of the street and tried to decide what to do. She could see Mrs. Chen's son's truck parked outside the elderly woman's house. He must have arrived to pick up his mother. That gave Sarah some hope that they could find a way out too. She called Lisa again, but the call went straight to voicemail. Sarah tried calling emergency services, but the lines were busy. She tried several more times with the same result. The rain was still coming down hard, and Sarah could see that the water level was continuing to rise. She watched in amazement as trash cans, lawn furniture, and debris floated past her car window. "Mama, when are we going to Aunt Lisa's?" Emma asked. Sarah turned around and smiled at her daughter, trying to hide her fear. "Soon, sweetheart. We just need to wait a little bit for the water to go down." But even as she said it, Sarah could see that the water wasn't going down. It was rising faster than she had ever imagined possible. She had heard about flash floods, but experiencing one was completely different from hearing about them on the news. A loud rumbling sound came from up the street, and Sarah looked toward the hills above their neighborhood. Her eyes widened in shock. A wall of muddy water was rushing down the hillside, carrying trees, rocks, and debris with it. It looked like a brown avalanche of water and mud heading straight for their neighborhood. Sarah's training as a nurse kicked in. She had learned to stay calm in emergency situations, but this was different. This was her and her baby daughter trapped in rising floodwater with nowhere to go. She quickly assessed their options. She could try to drive to higher ground, but the main roads were flooded. She could go back to her house, but it was in a low-lying area that would flood quickly. She could try to get to Mrs. Chen's house, which was slightly higher, but she would have to carry Emma through dangerous floodwater to get there. The rumbling sound was getting louder. Sarah looked up the street and saw the wall of floodwater getting closer. It was destroying everything in its path. Trees that had stood for decades were being uprooted and swept away like toothpicks. Sarah made a decision. She couldn't stay in the car. The floodwater would sweep it away. She had to get Emma to higher ground, even if it meant walking through the flood. She quickly got out of the car and opened the back door to get Emma out of her car seat. The water was now up to her knees and flowing fast. She could feel the current trying to push her off her feet. "Hold tight to Mommy, Emma," she said as she lifted her daughter out of the car. Emma wrapped her small arms around Sarah's neck and held on tightly. Sarah could feel her daughter trembling, whether from cold or fear. She wasn't sure. Sarah started walking toward what she hoped was higher ground, fighting against the current with every step. The water was filled with debris, and she had to be careful not to trip on submerged objects. Her feet slipped on the wet pavement several times, but she managed to keep her balance. Behind her, she heard a loud crash and turned to see that a large tree had fallen across the street where her car had been parked just minutes before. If they had stayed in the car, they could have been seriously hurt or killed. The rumbling sound was now very loud, and Sarah could see the main flood wave approaching rapidly. She needed to find shelter immediately. She looked around desperately and saw the small community center at the end of Elm Street. It was built on a concrete foundation that was higher than the surrounding area. Sarah struggled through the knee-deep water toward the community center, carrying Emma and fighting against the strong current. Each step was a battle. The water was cold and moved so fast that it felt like it was trying to sweep her legs out from under her. "Mama, I don't like this," Emma whimpered into Sarah's ear. "I know, baby. We're almost there. Just hold on tight." When Sarah reached the community center, she found that the building was locked. She pounded on the door with her free hand while holding Emma with the other, but there was no response. The building appeared to be empty. The rumbling sound was now overwhelming, and Sarah turned to see the main flood wave only a few blocks away. It was a wall of muddy water, debris, and foam that was at least 6 feet high and moving fast. It was destroying everything in its path, including houses. Sarah ran around to the back of the community center, still carrying Emma. She found a small covered area behind the building that was higher than the surrounding ground. It wasn't much, but it was the best shelter she could find. She set Emma down in the covered area and knelt beside her. "We're going to stay right here, okay, baby?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with fear. She could hear the loud rumbling sound, too. And even though she didn't understand what was happening, she knew it was scary. Sarah pulled out her phone and tried calling for help again. This time, she managed to get through to emergency services. 911, what's your emergency?" "We're trapped by floodwater," Sarah shouted over the noise of the approaching flood. "I'm at the community center on Elm Street in Millfield Valley with my 2-year-old daughter. There's a huge flood coming our way." "Ma'am, we have multiple flood emergencies throughout the valley. We're sending help, but it may take time to reach you. Can you get to higher ground?" "We're as high as we can get right now. The flood is almost here. Stay where you are and stay on the line if you can. Help is coming." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was shivering in her wet clothes. She took off her own jacket and wrapped it around her daughter, even though she was getting soaked by the rain. The rumbling sound had become a roar. Sarah looked around the corner of the building and saw the flood wave approaching. It was bigger than she had thought, at least 8 feet high, and it was moving incredibly fast. Cars, trees, and pieces of buildings were being swept along in the brown, churning water. Sarah grabbed Emma and held her tight. "Close your eyes, baby," she whispered. "Everything is going to be okay." But as the flood wave reached their street, Sarah wasn't sure that everything would be okay. The water struck the community center with tremendous force, and she could feel the building shake. Water began rushing around the building and into their covered area. Within seconds, the water was up to Sarah's waist. Emma was crying now, frightened by the noise and the chaos around them. Sarah held her daughter above the water level, but she could feel the current trying to pull them both away from the building. Sarah wrapped one arm around a support post of the covered area and held Emma with the other arm. The water continued to rise rapidly. Soon it was up to Sarah's chest, and she was struggling to keep both herself and Emma above the surface. "Help!" Sarah screamed as loud as she could. "Someone help us! We're trapped!" But her voice was lost in the roar of the flood water and the sound of debris crashing into buildings. She could see pieces of houses, cars, and trees rushing past them in the churning brown water. The force of the current was incredible, and Sarah was using all her strength to hold on to the support post. Emma was crying and clinging to her mother. "Mama, Mama!" "I've got you, baby," Sarah gasped, struggling to keep her head above water. "I've got you." But the water kept rising. And Sarah was beginning to realize that she might not be strong enough to hold on much longer. The current was so powerful, and she was getting tired. Her grip on the support post was slipping. "Help!" she screamed again, desperation clear in her voice. "The flood's coming! Someone help!" The water was now up to her neck, and she was barely able to keep Emma's head above the surface. Sarah could feel her strength fading. She had been fighting the current for what felt like hours, though it had probably only been minutes. Just when Sarah thought she couldn't hold on any longer, she heard a voice shouting over the roar of the floodwater. "Hold on! I'm coming to get you!" Sarah looked through the rain and debris and saw a figure in the water moving toward them. Someone was coming to help. Someone had heard her screams and was brave enough to enter the dangerous floodwater to reach them. As the figure got closer, Sarah could see that it was a young man in what looked like a scout uniform. He was swimming strongly against the current, using debris and partially submerged objects to help him navigate through the treacherous water. "I see you!" he called out. "Don't let go! I'm almost there!" Sarah used her last bit of energy to hold on to the post and keep Emma above water. Help was coming. They just had to hold on a little longer. The scout was risking his own life to save them, and Sarah felt a surge of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this disaster. The young man was fighting his way through the dangerous floodwater, getting closer with each stroke. Sarah could see the determination on his face as he battled against the powerful current that had already claimed so much in its path. Marcus Thompson had been a Boy Scout since he was 8 years old. Now 19 and an Eagle Scout, he had trained for emergency situations, but nothing had prepared him for what he was seeing in Millfield Valley that day. The flood had transformed the peaceful neighborhood into a raging river of destruction. Marcus lived on Hillcrest Avenue, which was on higher ground about half a mile from the flooded valley. He had been helping his elderly neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, move furniture to the second floor of his house when they heard the emergency sirens wailing across town. "Son, you better get inside," Mr. Rodriguez had told him as they watched the rain pour down. "This storm is getting dangerous." But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the people who lived in the lower parts of town. He knew from his emergency preparedness training that flash floods could be deadly, especially for families with small children or elderly residents who might not be able to evacuate quickly. Against Mr. Rodriguez's advice, Marcus had grabbed his emergency kit and headed down toward the valley. He wanted to see if anyone needed help. He had his waterproof radio, first aid supplies, emergency flares, and a length of rope that he always carried during severe weather. As he approached Elm Street, Marcus was shocked by what he saw. The entire area was underwater. Cars were submerged up to their windows, and debris was floating everywhere. The force of the water was incredible. He watched a full-size pickup truck get swept along like it weighed nothing. Marcus had been about to turn back when he heard something that made his blood run cold. Over the roar of the floodwater, he could hear someone screaming for help. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded desperate. He followed the sound and spotted Sarah and Emma clinging to the support post behind the community center. The woman was struggling to keep herself and her child above the rapidly rising water. Marcus could see that she was getting tired and wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. Every instinct told Marcus that entering the floodwater would be dangerous, possibly deadly. The current was moving at incredible speed, and the water was filled with sharp debris that could injure or kill him. But he also knew that if he didn't act immediately, the woman and child would drown. Marcus quickly assessed the situation. The water was about 8 feet deep where Sarah and Emma were trapped, and the current was flowing at approximately 15 miles per hour. He could see a path through the debris that might allow him to reach them, but it would require careful navigation and a lot of luck. He tied one end of his rope to a sturdy street sign that was still partially above water. If he got into trouble, the rope might be his only way back to safety. Then he took off his heavy jacket and boots, which would only weigh him down in the water. Marcus entered the floodwater gradually, feeling the powerful current immediately try to sweep him away. The water was shockingly cold, and he could feel debris bumping against his legs as it rushed past. He used his arms to swim and push himself forward while his feet searched for solid ground below. The first part of his journey was the most difficult. The current was strongest near the middle of the street, and Marcus had to fight for every inch of progress. Several times, large pieces of debris came dangerously close to hitting him. A section of someone's roof floated past just inches from his head. As he got closer to Sarah and Emma, Marcus could hear the woman's voice more clearly. She was talking to her daughter, trying to keep the little girl calm even though she was clearly exhausted and frightened herself. "It's okay, baby," Sarah was saying. "Mommy's got you. Everything is going to be okay." Marcus was impressed by her strength and determination. Even in this life-threatening situation, she was focused on protecting her child and keeping her calm. It reminded him of his own mother, who had always stayed strong during difficult times. "Ma'am!" Marcus called out when he was about 20 feet away. "I'm coming to help you!" Sarah looked toward him with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Thank God!" she called back. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on." Marcus could see that she was telling the truth. Her grip on the support post was weakening, and the water was now up to her chin. Emma was crying and clinging to her mother's neck. The last 20 feet were the most challenging part of Marcus's journey. The water near the community center was deeper and more turbulent because of the way the building affected the current. Marcus had to swim hard against powerful eddies and cross-currents. When he was about 10 feet away, a large piece of debris, it looked like part of a fence, came rushing toward him. Marcus dove underwater to avoid it, but the current immediately tried to sweep him away from Sarah and Emma. He fought his way back to the surface and resumed his approach, but he had lost valuable time and energy. "Almost there!" he called out, though he was breathing hard from the effort. Marcus finally reached the covered area where Sarah and Emma were trapped. Up close, he could see how desperate their situation really was. Sarah was barely keeping her head above water, and her lips were turning blue from the cold. Emma was shivering uncontrollably in her mother's arms. "I'm Marcus," he said, grabbing onto another support post to steady himself. "I'm going to get you both out of here." "Thank you," Sarah gasped. "I'm Sarah, and this is Emma. I don't think I can hold on much longer." Marcus quickly evaluated their options. The water was still rising, and the current was too strong for Sarah to swim against, especially while carrying Emma. They would need to find a way to get to higher ground or to a more secure location. "Listen," Marcus said, having to shout over the noise of the rushing water. "I'm going to help you get to that tree over there." He pointed to a large oak tree about 30 feet away that was partially submerged but still standing strong. "The branches are high enough that we can get out of the water." Sarah looked at the tree and then back at Marcus. 30 feet might as well have been 30 miles given the strength of the current and her exhausted condition. "I can't swim that far," she said. "Not while carrying Emma." "You won't have to swim," Marcus replied. "I brought rope. I'm going to tie it around your waist, and I'll help pull you to the tree. But first, I need to get the rope secured. Marcus carefully made his way to the oak tree, fighting against the current every step of the way. The water near the tree was slightly shallower, which helped, but he still had to be careful not to get swept away. He tied the rope securely around the trunk of the tree, making sure the knot would hold under stress. Then he made his way back to Sarah and Emma, using the rope as a guide. "Okay," he said when he reached them again. "I'm going to tie this rope around your waist. When I give you the signal, let go of the post and let the rope pull you toward the tree. I'll be right beside you to help." Sarah looked terrified at the thought of letting go of the only thing keeping her and Emma safe. "What if the rope breaks? What if I lose my grip on Emma?" "The rope won't break," Marcus assured her. "It's designed to hold much more weight than this, and I'll be right next to you. If anything goes wrong, I'll grab both of you." Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. She had to trust this young man who had risked his own life to help them. There was no other choice. Marcus carefully tied the rope around Sarah's waist, making sure it was secure but not so tight that it would hurt her. "Whatever happens, don't let go of Emma," he instructed. "Keep her head above water, and let the rope do the work." "I understand," Sarah said, though her voice was shaking. Marcus positioned himself next to Sarah and Emma. "On the count of 3, let go of the post. 1, 2, 3. Sarah released her grip on the support post, and immediately the current tried to sweep her away, but the rope held firm, and Marcus was right beside her, using his strength to help guide her toward the tree. The journey to the oak tree was terrifying. The current was so strong that it felt like they were being shot out of a cannon. Sarah held Emma tightly against her chest, trying to keep her daughter's head above water as they were pulled through the rushing flood. Emma was crying loudly now, frightened by the sensation of moving so fast through the water. "Mama! Mama!" she screamed. "I've got you, baby!" Sarah called back, though she was having trouble speaking because of the water splashing into her face. Marcus swam alongside them, using powerful strokes to help maintain their direction toward the tree. Several times, pieces of debris came dangerously close to hitting them, but Marcus was able to push them away or guide Sarah and Emma around them. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 30 seconds, they reached the oak tree. Marcus grabbed onto the trunk and then helped Sarah catch hold of a low-hanging branch. "Can you climb?" Marcus asked, breathing hard from the effort. Sarah looked up at the branches above them. The lowest sturdy branch was about 6 feet above the water level. "I think so," she said, though she wasn't sure how she would manage while carrying Emma. "I'll boost you up," Marcus said. "Once you're on the branch, I'll hand Emma up to you." It took several attempts, but Marcus was finally able to boost Sarah high enough for her to grab the branch and pull herself up. She sat on the thick branch, her legs dangling in the water, and reached down for Emma. Marcus carefully lifted the little girl up, and Sarah grabbed her daughter and pulled her onto the branch. Emma was still crying, but she was safe from the floodwater. Marcus pulled himself up onto a branch on the other side of the tree trunk. For the first time since entering the floodwater, he felt relatively secure. They were still in danger, the water was continuing to rise, and they were far from actual safety, but at least they weren't fighting against the current anymore. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "You saved our lives." Marcus smiled, though he was exhausted from the rescue effort. "We're not safe yet," he replied. "We need to figure out how to get to higher ground." As if to emphasize his point, they heard a loud crashing sound nearby. They looked over to see that the community center, which had provided their temporary shelter, was beginning to collapse under the force of the floodwater. Emma had stopped crying and was now looking around at the destruction with wide eyes. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but she could sense that they were in a dangerous situation. "Look, Mama," Emma said, pointing at a house that was floating past them. "House swimming." Despite everything they had been through, Sarah found herself smiling at her daughter's innocent observation. Yes, baby. The house is swimming. Marcus was studying their surroundings, trying to figure out their next move. The water was still rising, which meant that even their position in the tree might not be safe for long. They could hear sirens in the distance, which meant that emergency responders were active in the area, but it might be hours before help could reach them. He pulled out his waterproof radio and tried to contact emergency services. After several attempts, he managed to get through. This is Marcus Thompson. I have 2 flood victims with me in a tree on Elm Street near the community center. We need immediate rescue assistance. Copy that, Marcus. This is Emergency Coordinator Jackson. We have multiple rescue operations ongoing throughout the valley. Can you give me your exact location? Marcus described their location as precisely as he could, using landmarks that might still be visible to rescue crews. We're in an oak tree about 30 yards behind the community center. There's a woman and a small child with me. The child appears to be about 2 years old. Roger that. We have helicopter rescue teams in the area, but the weather is making flight operations difficult. Can you maintain your position for an extended period? Marcus looked at Sarah and Emma, both of whom were shivering from cold and exhaustion. We'll do our best, he replied. After ending the radio communication, Marcus explained the situation to Sarah. Help is coming, he said, but it might take a while. The storm is making it hard for rescue helicopters to fly. Sarah nodded, though she looked worried. Emma was getting tired and she was having trouble staying awake. The stress and cold were taking their toll on the little girl. Is there anything we can do to keep warm? Sarah asked. Marcus thought for a moment, then began taking off his outer shirt. Here, he said, handing it to Sarah. Wrap this around Emma. Body heat is our best option right now. As they settled in to wait for rescue, Marcus couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had changed. That morning, he had been planning to study for his college entrance exams. Now he was sitting in a tree in the middle of a devastating flood, having just completed the most important rescue of his life. The water continued to flow around them, carrying away pieces of people's lives. Marcus watched sadly as photo albums, children's toys, and family furniture floated past. He knew that many families would lose everything in this flood, and some might not be as fortunate as Sarah and Emma, but for now, they were alive. They had survived the initial impact of the flood, and help was on the way. Marcus had done what his scout training had taught him to do. He had been prepared, stayed calm under pressure, and helped others in need. As they waited in the tree, Sarah began to tell Marcus about her life and how she had ended up trapped in the flood. Marcus listened, understanding that talking helped her cope with the stress of their situation. Meanwhile, Emma had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, exhausted by their ordeal. The sound of rushing water continued around them, a constant reminder that they weren't safe yet. But they had made it this far. And Marcus was determined to see this rescue through to the end. The hours passed slowly as Sarah, Emma, and Marcus waited in the oak tree for rescue. The rain had finally begun to ease, but the floodwater remained dangerously high and fast-moving. Emma woke up several times, confused and frightened by their strange surroundings, but Sarah managed to keep her calm with gentle words and soft singing. Marcus kept checking his watch and monitoring their situation. The water level had stabilized, which was good news, but they were still in a precarious position. The tree branches were strong, but they were all getting cold and tired from sitting in wet clothes for so long. Around noon, they heard a sound that filled them with hope, the distinctive whir of helicopter rotors cutting through the air. Marcus grabbed his emergency flares from his kit and lit one, waving it above his head to signal their location. "Do you see that?" Sarah asked, pointing toward the sky. A red and white rescue helicopter was approaching from the direction of the hospital on the other side of town. "That's them," Marcus said with relief. "They found us." The helicopter circled their area several times, and Marcus could see the rescue crew inside assessing the situation. The pilot was having difficulty finding a safe place to hover because of power lines and debris in the water. Marcus's radio crackled to life. "Marcus, this is Rescue Team Alpha. We can see you in the tree. We're going to lower a rescue basket, but we need you to follow our instructions exactly." "Copy that," Marcus replied. "We're ready. Due to the conditions, we can only take one person at a time. We'll start with the child, then the mother, then you. The basket will be lowered on a cable. Do not try to climb into it until our rescue specialist gives you the all clear." Marcus relayed the instructions to Sarah, who immediately held Emma closer. The idea of being separated from her daughter, even briefly, was terrifying to her. "I want to go with Emma," Sarah said. Marcus understood her fear, but he also knew they had to follow the rescue team's instructions. "They know what they're doing," he assured her. "Emma will be safe, and you'll be with her again in just a few minutes." The helicopter moved into position above their tree, and Marcus could see a rescue specialist in an orange suit preparing to lower the rescue basket. The downdraft from the helicopter's rotors created additional challenges, making the tree branches sway and causing spray from the floodwater below. The rescue basket slowly descended on a steel cable. When it reached their level, the rescue specialist, whose name tag read Johnson, called out instructions. "Ma'am, I need you to place your daughter in the basket," Johnson said. "Make sure she's sitting down and holding on to the sides." Sarah's hands were shaking as she prepared to put Emma in the basket. The little girl seemed to understand that something important was happening, and looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. "Mama go too?" Emma asked. "Mama will be right behind you, sweetheart," Sarah said, fighting back tears. "This nice man is going to take you for a ride in the helicopter." Johnson smiled at Emma and spoke in a gentle voice. "Hi there, little one. Would you like to take a ride with me? We're going to fly up to the helicopter just like the birds do." Emma nodded, though she still looked uncertain. Sarah carefully placed her daughter in the rescue basket and gave her one last kiss on the forehead. "I love you, baby. I'll see you in just a minute." Johnson secured Emma in the basket with special restraints designed for children. "She's secure," he called up to the helicopter crew. "Taking her up now." As the basket rose toward the helicopter, Emma looked down at her mother and began to cry. Sarah waved and called out reassurances, but her own tears were flowing freely now. Marcus put a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "She's safe now," he said. "In a few minutes, you'll both be warm and dry in the hospital." The rescue took longer than expected because of the difficult conditions, but eventually, the basket came back down for Sarah. Johnson helped her into the basket and secured her safely. "Thank you," Sarah said to Marcus as the basket prepared to lift off. "Thank you for saving our lives." "Take care of yourself," Marcus replied. "I'll see you at the hospital." As Sarah was lifted toward the helicopter, Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions. He was relieved that she and Emma were safe, but he also felt oddly alone sitting in the tree by himself. For the past several hours, they had been a team, working together to survive. Now he was back to being just one person waiting for rescue. The basket came down for Marcus one final time. As Johnson helped him into it, Marcus took one last look at the devastated neighborhood below. The flood had transformed a peaceful residential area into a disaster zone. Cars were scattered like toys, houses had been swept off their foundations, and debris was everywhere. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Johnson said, following Marcus's gaze. "It's unbelievable," Marcus replied. "I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this." As they were lifted toward the helicopter, Marcus could see the full extent of the flood damage. The entire valley was underwater, and rescue crews were working throughout the area to save stranded residents. He counted at least 6 other helicopters involved in rescue operations. Inside the helicopter, Marcus was reunited with Sarah and Emma. Emma was wrapped in a thermal blanket and seemed to be doing well, though she was still clinging tightly to her mother. Sarah looked exhausted, but grateful. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked. "Like I can't quite believe we're alive," Sarah replied. "If you hadn't come to help us." "But I did," Marcus said, "and we're all safe now." The helicopter flight to Millfield General Hospital took only about 10 minutes, but it gave them a clear view of the flood's impact. Marcus estimated that hundreds of homes had been damaged or destroyed, and the cleanup effort would take months or even years. At the hospital, they were met by medical staff who immediately began checking them for injuries and signs of hypothermia. Marcus was in good condition, but Sarah and Emma were both suffering from mild exposure to the cold water. Dr. Patricia Williams, the emergency room physician, examined Emma carefully. "She's going to be fine," she told Sarah. "Children are remarkably resilient. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but I expect a full recovery." Sarah felt overwhelming relief at the doctor's words. Throughout the entire ordeal, her biggest fear had been that something would happen to Emma. Over the next few hours, Marcus learned more about the scope of the disaster. The flash flood had been caused by an unprecedented amount of rainfall in a very short time period. The storm had dumped more than 6 inches of rain in less than 2 hours, overwhelming the valley's drainage systems. 17 people had been rescued from the floodwaters, and miraculously there were no fatalities. However, more than 200 homes had been damaged, and dozens of families had lost everything they owned. Marcus's actions during the flood quickly became known throughout the community. Local news stations interviewed him about the rescue, and the mayor presented him with a commendation for heroism. "Marcus Thompson represents the best of our community," Mayor Rodriguez said during a ceremony at City Hall a week after the flood. "When his neighbors were in danger, he didn't hesitate to put his own life at risk to help them." But Marcus was uncomfortable with all the attention. As far as he was concerned, he had simply done what any decent person would do in that situation. He had been trained to help others in emergencies, and he had used that training when it was needed. Sarah and Emma recovered fully from their experience, but the flood had a profound impact on their lives. They had lost their home and most of their possessions, but Sarah felt incredibly grateful to be alive. The experience had reminded her of what was truly important in life. The insurance settlement allowed Sarah to buy a new house on higher ground, and she made sure it was equipped with emergency supplies and an evacuation plan. She also enrolled in first aid and emergency preparedness classes, wanting to be better prepared if anything like this ever happened again. Marcus's experience during the flood influenced his decision about his future career. He had been planning to study business in college, but the flood rescue made him realize he wanted to work in emergency services. He changed his college major to emergency management and began volunteering with the local fire department. "That day changed my perspective on a lot of things," Marcus told a newspaper reporter 6 months after the flood. "I realized that helping people during their worst moments is the most important thing I could do with my life." Sarah and Emma stayed in touch with Marcus, and they became close family friends. Emma, now 3 years old, called him Uncle Marcus and always got excited when he came to visit. During one of these visits, Sarah brought up something that had been on her mind for months. "I've been thinking about that day in the flood," she said as they sat on her new back porch, watching Emma play in the yard. "I keep wondering what would have happened if you hadn't heard me screaming for help." Marcus considered her question seriously. "I think about that too," he said. "But I did hear you, and I was able to help. Sometimes I think that's just how things are supposed to work out." "Do you think it was fate?" Sarah asked. "Maybe," Marcus replied. "Or maybe it was just a combination of training, preparation, and being in the right place at the right time. Either way, I'm glad it worked out the way it did." The flood had brought out both the worst and the best in nature and in people. While the storm had caused tremendous destruction and hardship, it had also revealed the strength, courage, and compassion that existed within the community. The recovery effort brought neighbors together in ways they had never experienced before. People who had been strangers before the flood worked side by side to clean up debris, rebuild homes, and support families who had lost everything. Marcus continued his volunteer work with the fire department and eventually became certified as an emergency medical technician. He participated in several other rescues over the years, but none were as dramatic or personally meaningful as saving Sarah and Emma from the flood. Sarah returned to her job as a nurse at the local hospital, but she also began working as a volunteer with the American Red Cross, helping families who had been displaced by natural disasters. She often thought about how Marcus had risked his life to save her and Emma, and she wanted to pay that kindness forward. Emma grew up with no memory of being trapped in the flood, but the story became part of her family's history. As she got older, Sarah told her about the brave young man who had saved their lives, and Emma always listened with wide-eyed amazement. "Uncle Marcus is a hero, isn't he, Mama?" Emma would say. "Yes, he is," Sarah would reply. "But he's also just a good person who was willing to help when we needed it most." The oak tree that had provided their refuge during the flood became something of a local landmark. The city decided not to remove it during the cleanup, and it still stands today with a small plaque at its base commemorating the rescue that took place there. 5 years after the flood, Marcus graduated from college with a degree in emergency management. Sarah and Emma attended his graduation ceremony, and Sarah gave a speech about how Marcus had not only saved their lives, but had also inspired others to get involved in community service and disaster preparedness. "Marcus showed us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're called upon to help others," Sarah said. "His courage and compassion during our darkest moment gave us hope and reminded us that we're never truly alone as long as there are people like him in our community." After the ceremony, as they walked across campus together, Emma took Marcus's hand and looked up at him with the serious expression that children sometimes get when they're trying to understand something important. "Uncle Marcus," she said, "when I grow up, I want to help people too. Just like you did." Marcus smiled down at the little girl, whose life he had helped save years earlier. "I think you'll be great at helping people, Emma, and when you're old enough, maybe you can help me teach other people how to be prepared for emergencies." "Really?" Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Really?" Marcus confirmed. As they continued walking, Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed since that terrifying day in the flood. What had started as a natural disaster had ultimately brought them together as a family of choice, bound not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual care. The flood had taken away their house and possessions, but it had given them something even more valuable: a deeper understanding of human resilience, compassion, and the importance of community. They had learned that even in the darkest moments, there are always people willing to risk everything to help others. Marcus had gone from being a college-bound teenager to a committed emergency responder. Sarah had moved from being a single mother focused primarily on her own family to someone dedicated to helping disaster victims throughout the region. And Emma, though she didn't remember the flood itself, had grown up with a deep appreciation for helping others and a strong sense of community responsibility. The story of their rescue spread far beyond Millfield Valley. Marcus received letters from scout troops around the country, asking him to speak about emergency preparedness and the importance of being ready to help others. He always accepted these invitations, understanding that sharing their story might help prevent similar tragedies or inspire others to take action when help was needed. Years later, when Emma was in high school, she wrote an essay about the flood for her English class. She interviewed both Marcus and her mother for the essay, learning details about that day that she had never known before. "I learned that heroes aren't just in movies or books," Emma wrote in her conclusion. "They're regular people who make the choice to help others, even when it's dangerous or difficult. My mom was a hero for protecting me during the flood. Marcus was a hero for rescuing us, and all the people who helped our community rebuild after the disaster were heroes too. The flood taught our family that we're stronger when we help each other, and that even the worst disasters can't destroy the human spirit. The flood had lasted only a few hours, but its impact on their lives continued for years. It had shown them that life could change in an instant, that preparation and training could mean the difference between life and death, and that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary acts of courage and compassion. Marcus often said that saving Sarah and Emma was the most important thing he had ever done, not because it made him a hero, but because it reminded him of the fundamental human obligation to help others in need. The flood had been a disaster, but the rescue had been a triumph of the human spirit over the forces of nature. As the years passed, the three of them remained close, bound together by their shared experience of survival, rescue, and recovery. They had faced the worst that nature could throw at them and had come through it together, stronger and more connected than they had ever imagined possible. The flood's coming had indeed brought terror and destruction, but it had also revealed the power of human courage, compassion, and community. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all.